Today we're going to divide positive and negative fractions. So two numbers whose product is 1 are multiplicative inverses. Or you may be familiar with the term reciprocals of each other. So remember that product is the answer to a multiplication problem. So when you multiply two numbers and their answer is 1, those two numbers are multiplicative inverses or reciprocals of each other. So we have to be able to do this in order to divide fractions. So we're going to write the multiplicative inverse of each of these. So here we have a mixed number, and the way we have to find the multiplicative inverse is by changing the mixed number into a fraction. So remember that we multiplied the denominator times the whole number, so 3 times a negative 5, or 3 times 5 is 15, and then 15 plus 2 is 17. So we get a negative 17 thirds. Now we want to write the inverse of that, so we're going to flip it. You may have heard of the term flipping. And so the multiplicative inverse of negative 5 2/3 is a negative 3/17. We are not going to change the sign. We keep the sign as it is. Because if we were to test this and we did a negative 17 thirds times a negative 3/17, these would cancel out and we would get a negative times a negative is a positive 1. So our product is 1. Okay, I would like for you to try number 2 on your own. So go ahead and pause that and then try it. We'll go over the answer here in a second. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to work this problem. So you should have gotten 3 times 2 is 6 plus 1 is 7. So that's a negative 7 thirds. But then we have to do the reciprocal or the multiplicative inverse, so we're going to flip it. And so we get negative 3/7. Now number 3, the number is 7. So remember that 7 can be made into a fraction by putting it over 1. So when we do the multiplicative inverse, we would do 1/7. Okay, try number 4 on your own, and then we will check that in class tomorrow. So now we're actually going to divide fractions. So to divide fractions, we're going to multiply the first fraction by the multiplicative inverse or the reciprocal, or we could even say the multiplicative inverse of the second fraction. So when we're solving this, we're going to do 3/4. We're going to change division to multiplication, and we're going to change the second number by making it its reciprocal or multiplicative inverse. So 3/4 times 2 over 1. We're going to reduce before we multiply, and we get 3/2. Go ahead and change that to a mixed number. So we get 1 and 1/2. Okay, number 2 is negative 1/4 divided by 7/8. So we're going to keep the first number. We're going to change division to multiplication, and we're going to use the reciprocal or the multiplicative inverse of the second number. Now we can reduce. 4 goes into 4 one time, and 4 goes into 8 2 times. And negative 1 times 2 is a negative 2. and 1 times 7 is 7. Negative 2/7. Okay, we're going to divide by a whole number now. So the process is the same. We're going to keep the first number. We're going to change the division to multiplication. But this time, because 3 is a whole number, remember how we put 7 over 1 earlier, we're going to put 3 over 1 and then use the multiplicative inverse. So it would be 1/3. So 4/9 times 1/3. 4 times 1 is 4. 9 times 3 is 27. Okay, I'd like for you to try number 2 on your own, and we will check that one in class tomorrow. Now let's divide mixed numbers. So here we have 2 3/4 divided by a negative 2 1/5. So when we're dividing mixed numbers, we're going to change both of them into improper fractions. So 4 times 2 is 8, plus 3 is 11, so we have 11/4. I'm going to go ahead and keep the division for now. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 1 is 11/5. Now I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal. So I kept the first number, I changed to multiplication, and I used the reciprocal for the second number. So now I'm going to reduce 11, can go into 11 one time, and I have, and I need to remember this was a negative here, a negative times, 1 times a negative 5 is a negative 5/4, and that reduces to a negative 1 1/4. Okay, the next one is negative 3 1/2 divided by a negative 1 1/4. So again, we're going to change these to improper fractions. So 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So that's a negative 7/2 divided by 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 is 5/4, and that's a negative. So now a negative 7/2 times a negative 4/5. I'm going to reduce 2 and 4. A negative 7 times a negative 2 is a positive 14. 1 times 5 is 5. Make it into a mixed number, 2 4/5. Now, so far we've just talked about the multiplication and division, just the computation. Now let's look at a real-world example and see what this might look like with division. So Paul is storing a set of art books on a shelf that has 11 1/4 inches of shelf space. If each book is 3/4 inches wide, how many books can be stored on the shelf? So when we're looking at this, I like to draw a picture, because sometimes students get confused why sometimes when we divide by a fraction our number ends up being bigger. So if you do a drawing, it does help make it make sense. So this shelf is 11 1/4 inches. And each book is 3/4 inches wide. So these would all be 3/4, these books. So we are dividing this whole shelf space by 3/4. So that's going to look like 11 1/4 divided by 3/4. So we want to see how many 3/4 can go into 11 1/4. So we're going to change to an improper fraction. So 4 times 11 is 44, plus 1 is 45/4. And then we're going to change the division to multiplication. And we're going to multiply by the reciprocal. Now we can reduce this. These are pretty big numbers. We want to make sure that we reduce these. So 1, 1, 1, 15. 15 times 1 is 15. 1 times 1 is 1. So we could fit 15 books on the shelf. So again, we had 11 1/4 inches, and we can fit 15 books that are 3/4 of an inch wide. Tomorrow we are going to go into more depth about why we use the reciprocal and what the division of fractions really means. I would like for you to try number 2 on your own, and we will check it in class tomorrow.